Nags at the soul. It raises questions. And against all reason, today the Jonestown story got much worse.
The original count of persons found dead at the Jonestown site has been found to be seriously in error. It now appears there may be as many as 780 bodies total found at the site. They were found simply buried under other bodies. There were larger adults that were grouped together, and under their bodies were found the bodies of smaller adults and children.
How is it possible that you can walk around and lift bodies up and not see it? It's so incredible.
When we were out there originally, there were bodies under bodies as we were working. But we were working on a total estimated count. As we briefed at the press briefing, we told you that the count we were working with was approximately 410, and we figured that there may be a few more hidden under bodies. As we began to work into the area and clear out the bodies that were visible, we kept discovering more and more and more.
The final count may reach 800. What happened in Jonestown, how it happened, how it could happen without our knowing about it, are the subjects of our broadcast tonight.
This is a CBS News special report, The Horror of Jonestown. These reports are sponsored on a continuing basis by the makers of Herbal Tegrin Shampoo.
That's Kathy Willis. She teaches at our school. I bet she's worried now about that problem dandruff of hers. I wish she'd ask me.
Mr. Owens, which shampoo do you think...
Ever tried Tegrin?
Does it really work?
Well, in a national survey, 3 out of 4 dermatologists judged the medicated ingredient in Tegrin effective in fighting even problem dandruff.
I'll give it a test.
How's that dandruff problem?
I'll give Tegrin an A+, Mr. Owens.
Tegrin, prove it to yourself. It works.
Denture wearers, you have a powerful enemy. The bacterial film called plaque, which grows on your dentures every day. But you have an even more powerful friend, New Mint Denture Cream. Denture Cream has a special formula for cleaning dentures with 3 powerful ingredients to help brush away bacterial plaque, leaving your dentures fresh and clean. Yes, plaque is a powerful enemy, but New Mint Denture Cream is more powerful than plaque.
The story of what happened at the Reverend Jim Jones's People's Temple commune was always unbelievable. True, of course, but unbelievable. And today it became more so simply because the numbers got so much worse. Not 408 or 409 dead, as the Guyanese had said earlier, but at least 780, perhaps more. David Dick reports from Georgetown, Guyana's capital.
The day had begun with the expectation that the last of the bodies would be brought out soon. The work had gone on around the clock. It had been a tedious, difficult assignment under a hot sun and intermittent tropical rain. But Task Force Guyana's mission would be over soon, and U.S. Air Force personnel would be heading back home for a delayed Thanksgiving. But in the back of many minds, there was a nagging question. Where were approximately 375 unaccounted for members of the People's Temple? For instance, where were 14-year-old Darren and 16-year-old Maury Gennaro? That's what their grieving mother wanted to know. Mrs. Richard Gennaro of Redwood Valley, California, had arrived in Georgetown Saturday night to join her family, which had preceded her to the People's Temple settlement. She thought it was strange nobody had met her at the airport. She checked in at a hotel and learned of the first 400 deaths. But she refused to accept what seemed to her to be resignation on the part of U.S. and Guyanese officials that there were probably no more survivors, no more bodies. Maybe the population just wasn't as large as Jim Jones had said it was.
Help us down here. We are isolated. Then I came alone. And I was anticipating nothing but happiness. Just a dream come true. My son has been there since May of last year. The year before this, it's been 1.5 years since I've seen him, and my daughter's been there a whole year ago August. And my husband's been gone since last September, a year. And I made this sacrifice of being away from them to build a better world. That's all I can tell you.
After today's shocking discovery of hundreds more bodies, The possibility that Mrs. Gennaro's children are alive has faded to perhaps very little chance at all. The metal caskets at the Georgetown airport will be opened and filled and closed again and again, 780 times before Task Force Guyana is finished. But even then, if there are still missing members of the People's Temple settlement, other relatives will not be satisfied until there has been at least a thorough aerial search of the jungle of northwest Guyana. When the last casket is finally closed at the Georgetown airport, the complete story of what happened to all the members of the People's Temple settlement will remain open for a long time. David Dick, CBS News, Georgetown, Guyana.
Not many survivors, not much hope for many more. Those who did live through the Jonestown horror, though, offer the only clues we have to what it was like there, to how and why what happened happened. Reporters talked with them today about life and death in the commune.
Giving my home. My home was turned over to the church, approximately $16,000 of the proceeds, approximately 25 to 33% of my income for a period of 12 years. He's taken my money, my home, and my wife.
The reason we wasn't in school very much is because most of the time they had us in the fields working, cutting great big tall razor grass and stuff. We got up at 6 o'clock and we went to work at 7, worked till 12, and then when we get off we'd have school. Then we'd have a few hours off to take a shower and stuff. Then at nighttime we'd have to be at a meeting.
I seen what it was. I seen how people was treated. I dropped from 183 pounds to 153 pounds in less than weeks. And the medical aid was bad. The food was bad. It's just with nothing we can do to protect ourselves or to get anybody else out of there.
There was something wrong. It didn't seem like no freedom. It looked like he had no freedom to go or come where he wanted to do. And after a while, he made a public announcement that nobody could go back. He wouldn't let anybody go back to the fascist state of the United States, is what he said. He said if you go back, you go back either in a box or you'd have to swim back.
First person that went up was a young mother. I'd say she was about 27 or so. She had a small baby. And I'd say the baby was approximately 1.5, something like that. She walked up and she administered to her own baby, and then she took her home. And then she went over into a field and sat down. And that's, it was hard to believe. I could understand older people maybe, but I couldn't understand these young people just doing that. But parents were talking to their children and telling them whatever they were telling them, and a lot of the children were crying. And he was telling them not to tell the children that they were dying, not to tell them it was painful. He was telling people it wasn't painful, and that, people had to die with dignity.
It all happened very quickly. All the killing, all the dying happened last Saturday in less than half a day. It was our finding out about it that took the time. All we knew last Sunday was that Congressman Leo Ryan had led a delegation visiting the People's Commune in Jonestown, Guyana, that members of the commune attacked Ryan's party as it was at a nearby airstrip getting ready to leave, killing Ryan and 4 other members of his group. We have a fragmentary record of that attack, the last pictures shot by NBC cameraman Bob Brown, one of the dead. And by Monday, we had a vivid description of that attack from Brown's wounded sound man, Steve Sung.
And somehow, one shot hit Bob Brown in the leg, I believe. I don't know what part of the body. He screamed, ouch! And next thing I know, the guy came close and blew his brain off. And next thing I know, I say, oh, next one would be me who get killed, right?
But by then we had learned it was much worse. We knew that Jones and his followers had sipped from a shared bucket of cyanide and soft drink, that some had been shot, and that unbelievably 408 people, officials said, were dead. We saw the first pictures Tuesday. The bodies seemed awful and orderly, not flung about like corpses after a battle, but neat, hand in hand sometimes, arms about each other's shoulders. Steve Jones, son of the dead cult leader, talked that day of hating his father.
I can almost say that I hate this man for doing what he's done, because he has destroyed everything I've lived for.
There was another question all that time. Where was the rest of the commune? Another 400 people, everyone thought, must have fled the camp, must be somewhere in this rainforest. On Wednesday, Colonel Al Heater suggested, for the first time, that they might not be there after all.
Well, we have no positive indication here that there are 400 people out there, alive and wandering through the jungle.
Really?
We don't have that indication here.
By then, the body lift was underway. U.S. helicopters bringing the sealed bags to Georgetown, Guyana's capital, and big jet transports carrying them from there to Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, to a mortuary left over from the Vietnam War. The first bodies arrived Thanksgiving morning. One of them was the leader's, identification now formally verified.
Results of the fingerprint identification examination conducted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation has concluded that the fingerprints of the body tentatively identified as Reverend Jones match the prints on file known to be Jones.
In Guyana, Thanksgiving Day, there were prayers for the still elusive survivors.
We are especially praying today for our brothers and sisters who are still lost in the bush.
Only today we learned that those prayers were too late, that most of the missing survivors had not survived at all, but had added their numbers to the many dead, lying layer on layer, the spokesman said, so that the first searchers failed to find them. That was a puzzle, added to another puzzle. Why? What had happened to change Jonestown from the People's Commune into hell in a very small place?
I think I'm in a nightmare, because when that fellow started out, he did all kinds of good for anybody or everybody. But where it went wrong, what happened, I do not know.
The federal government has been defending itself against various charges that it was warned about the situation in Jonestown and should have done something. Today, Justice Department officials stuck to the position that investigating religious cults might violate the Constitution. And the State Department insisted again that it had done all it could or should have done. More from Ike Pappas in Washington.
Could anyone in the government see it coming? Could it have been prevented? Is anyone in Washington to blame? The congressional investigations that will inevitably follow may provide some of the answers, but Joe Holsinger, Congressman Ryan's chief aide, charges that the bureaucracy here at the State Department may have been a major contributing factor to the tragedy at Jonestown. Holsinger told correspondent David Dow Ryan complained to the State Department a year and a half ago about intimidation, threats, and possible suicide at the commune, but that the department simply passed the problem on to the embassy in Guyana, which Holsinger said did not dig deep enough into the charges.
They were accepting at face value the reports of a few people, one or two people, who were going out there almost as mail boys to deliver mail, and they were coming back with reports that everything was fine. The one name that I recall, with whom I spoke, had come back to Washington and seemed to be in charge of the desk that handled which Guyana was included. His name was Richard McCoy. And he made some trips out there, and he came back saying that everybody told him that everything was fine. That they'd ask him, do you want to leave with me? And they'd say no.
Holsinger said Ryan, a member of the House International Relations Committee, was even ignored when he demanded a separate State Department probe. So Ryan had to go to Guyana to find out himself.
Somewhere along the line, between Secretary Vance, whom Leo had the highest regard for, and down at this low-level officials in Guyana, which is a godforsaken post, somebody should have listened. Somebody in there should have said, perhaps we should do more.
Deputy Assistant Secretary of State John Bushnell defended McCoy, calling him a veteran Foreign Service officer. Bushnell said his department conducted more than 50 interviews at the commune and turned up no evidence to substantiate the charges of Ryan and the parents of the commune members.
Well, it's not the role of the State Department to go around the world policing the way that Americans abroad or anyone else abroad may be living. That's not our job. They're American citizens. They have their rights to privacy and to proceed as they wish. And it is not the responsibility of the State Department to police, in any sense, the way Americans live abroad.
But Bushnell admitted his department received warnings that suicides at the commune were possible.
If we look back in the files and we see a few letters that said there was a suicide pact, knowing what now happened, I guess I would say that there was some evidence that there was something going on there. On the other hand, there are often accusations that a person, for example, was suicidal, was going to commit suicide. It often doesn't happen, and it is very hard to judge. And I think if we were talking a few weeks ago, and someone said to me, here is a group which is undertaken to commit mass suicide, that we would all found it hard to believe that there was a group that seriously contemplated doing that.
I think it's what Mr. Holsinger's point is. One of them is that that you didn't take it beyond the fact or the point of saying it's hard to believe that this couldn't happen, that you didn't actually, State Department dropped the ball and not actually following up with a thorough investigation in this area to determine whether it could or not.
Well, I think that might be, and he's in a position where if he thinks there should be a legal authority and funds provided to the State Department to follow up on this sort of thing. But as I said, we do not have a mandate to dig into the lifestyles of Americans living overseas.
If our government is so ineffectual that somehow we are trapped by these rules, that we can't do anything, my God, we're through as a country. 1,500 Americans down there, reports of all this, and we can't do anything? That's the most lame-brained excuse I've ever heard in my life. It means they're covered. But if they can't do anything, they should get out and let somebody who can do something have the jobs, and somebody to run the government can run it.
Ike Pappas, CBS News, Washington.
Jonestown, as much as anything, is a mystery. Why in the world would so many people, 800 people perhaps, agree to kill themselves? What kind of a leader could order mass suicide and be obeyed? Who was Jim Jones that grown-ups would kill themselves and their children for him? He was not, for one thing, an obvious fanatic. David Culhane reports.
James Thurman Jones, age 46, a minister of God, and his people believed in him, in his goodness, his love. That feeling is clear in these films from various independent documentary sources.
I really don't feel comfortable with our worship being photographed. I really don't.
Many felt his soft voice conveyed true charisma, the extraordinary spiritual grace granted to certain individuals, the power to heal, the power to lead large numbers of people. He was born in a little town in Indiana, an ordinary boy, except that he always wanted to be a preacher. He would deliver sermons for the dead pets of neighbors. Even before he got his university degree, he began work as a minister. His special concerns were for children, the elderly, and the poor.
He loved the poor. I think he really, truly did love the poor. And he lived with them and gave himself to them, and that's all he could talk and live for.
There was a person, in the person of Jim, who showed such concern, such tenderness and love for children and for animals.
Part Indian himself, he always worked for the rights of black people. He spent a controversial 18 months as director of the Indianapolis Human Rights Commission. He gave blacks an attention that was often rare for them.
Well, he called me later and says, why didn't you come back to the temple? So I thought no pastor ever asked me to come to the temple before, or while I wasn't in church. It was such a warm atmosphere there, and I felt the presence of God there.
Jesus Christ had the most revolutionary teachings to be said, in the sense that he said to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, take in the stranger, minister to those the widows and afflicted in their suffering. And we feel that no one really tried Christianity too effectively, or the Judeo-Christian tradition. And if it is tried, and it will be exonerated, and it offers the panacea for world order.
That vision of a panacea led Pastor Jim Jones and 200 followers to California, and his church expanded there in San Francisco and Los Angeles, becoming effective in politics as well as the world of religion. And then he opened the colony in Guyana. Somewhere, Pastor Jones' beliefs began to center more and more on himself and his sense of persecution by almost everyone outside his community.
He claimed to be God, to be immortal, to have been Jesus Christ, to have been Buddha, to have been almost every major religious prophet from the past.
No one really knows whether there was some moment when his vision of a world order turned to death, or whether it was something that happened to him gradually. But the final destruction to which he brought his church family made a terrible mockery of his earlier views on family togetherness.
And we feel that this is absolutely necessary in our time when there's such alienation between people, races, but not only just ethnic and racial groups, but people in general. And we feel that there must be a restoration of that closeness, that family togetherness that there was in the early days, where people served one another and were solicitous for everyone's welfare in the total church family.
David Culhane, CBS News, New York.
One of the biggest mysteries in the Jonestown story is why so many people apparently accepted death with so little resistance. CBS News has talked to two experts on the psychology of terrorism and so-called mind control, Dr. Frederick Hacker of the University of Southern California and Dr. Frank Ochberg of the National Institute of Mental Health.
I think the most dangerous thing that happened with this particular cult was they literally and they figuratively moved into the jungle. If these approaches to novel ways of living and of experiencing life occur under the open surveillance of all of us, it doesn't necessarily mean being intrusive and spying on people. But having an exchange of what's going on, we can tolerate a great deal of novelty. It's when it moves out that it becomes dangerous.
You talk about moving into the kind of jungle atmosphere. Can you, as a doctor and some background in this area, could you have any idea of what will possess that many people to commit suicide?
I remember seeing Rosalind Carter on television saying it just baffles me. I have the same feeling about that. And I'm not so sure we're going to find a single answer either. I have a feeling that for some, it was a conscious and very rational choice to do what they did. For others, it was a certain amount of following people in whose judgment they trusted. Some were too young to make informed decisions. Some who got there may have found themselves, in essence, held hostage. And because they were held hostage, they don't necessarily revolt and attempt to escape, because part of what we're finding in studying those who are held hostage is an ironic and an irrational set of positive feelings toward those who hold them. It doesn't happen all the time, but it happens with enough frequency to make me wonder if that wasn't occurring in Guyana as well.
What very often happens is that these organizations start with relatively good intentions or with very fine intentions even, and then gradually deteriorate as the leading clique or the leader assumes full power over the people. He becomes paranoid, he becomes imbued with ideas of his own mission and totally uncontrolled, so can he really say that absolute power over people corrupts absolutely. These sects and cults predominantly are totalitarian islands in our democratic society. They give their adherents the permission to hate, to despise their opponents, and to use whatever means they want to aggressively. And we know from long psychiatric experience that homicidal and suicidal impulses are very close together.
Part of this week's story has been the reaction to the events in Jonestown of the people Jones left behind, the congregation which stayed at the original church in San Francisco. Harold Dow reports.
At headquarters of the People's Temple, as word of the suicide stunned the world, there was tension and anger throughout the week. Those with relatives in Guyana crowded outside the church gates. Some angrily shook the fences, demanding information about loved ones. But there was silence from the People's Temple. The doors were locked. Church members remained inside. Yesterday, outsiders were allowed in for the first time since the tragedy. There were pictures of the settlement in Guyana. The faces were happy. Dolls made by the colony were on display. There was a printing press where the Reverend Jim Jones had put out a community newspaper, a shortwave radio for reaching the remote settlement. and the church members talked about their grief, but insisted the movement begun by Jones would continue.
No, we're not over. We are still on human service.
We're still here.
But today, as word reached San Francisco about the hundreds of additional dead in Jonestown, even the committed broke away.
But Jim Jones was totally wrong. So in my opinion, People's Temple is dead because the ideals it stood for can no longer stand.
But there's been talk of carrying on the People's Temple. Are you saying that you can't do that now?
I'm speaking for an individual side. I don't see how I can.
A spokeswoman for the ex-members of the People's Temple, those who claim they witnessed routine rehearsals for mass suicide, read a statement today mourning the loss of nearly the entire Jonestown colony. And at the People's Temple, members started to compile a list of who had been in Guyana to help the State Department identify the dead. The attorney for the People's Temple, Charles Gary, said the church will try to help pay for burial in California of the victims in Guyana. But there is little money, Gary said. The People's Temple, he continued, will almost certainly be sold. Harold Dow, CBS News, San Francisco.
2 more plane loads of bodies arrived tonight at Dover Air Force Base in Delaware, but hundreds more are still in Guyana. Only 9 bodies have been positively identified at Dover. The whole job of transporting, embalming, identifying, and burying the dead is expected to go on for weeks. Lem Tucker reports.
The 151 bodies that arrived here a few hours ago will not get to the morgue for 2 to 3 days, maybe longer. Now bodies are being taken from planes and temporarily stored in cargo buildings. There is no more room at the morgue. As rapidly as the people here can, they are sterilizing the used containers, making them ready for bodies still waiting at the Georgetown airport. 1 load went out tonight on a plane which just yesterday brought some of the dead here. At the mortuary this afternoon, they were starting to store bodies in refrigerated trucks, and inside, fingerprinting is taking place as a beefed-up staff works to establish identities for what are just numbers at this point. And so far, not many people who think they may have lost relatives in Guyana have come or called. In a few weeks, it will all be over. Some bodies will probably never be identified, and some that are may never be claimed by relatives. And any who are finally left will be buried by the government somewhere here in the cold winter of Delaware. Lem Tucker, CBS News, Dover Air Force Base, Delaware.
At the end, we try to offer some sort of explanation, but we can't this time. None of us involved in the preparation of this broadcast knows why the commune members did what they did. Most of us, as the story unfolded this week, have thought, not me, I'd never do that. Yet one expert psychologist argues that under the proper pressures, any of us would, that thought control can reach us all. That point can be debated, and will be. Obey orders to kill one's children, unthinkable, and yet demanding thought. Jonestown's horror is the most dramatic story in a long while, and one of the most human, stirring the emotions while it puzzles the mind. We know most of what happened by now. Experts and the rest of us will be a long time puzzling over the why. We have in this century scouted planets and unlocked atoms, but the least known frontiers lie within ourselves, in the old riddles of the human soul. Jonestown is a scary reminder of that. I'm Bruce Morton. Good night.
This has been a CBS News special report. The Horror of Jonestown. This is CBS.
Today, what happened at Jonestown, Guyana seemed beyond belief. The mass murder and suicide of more than 900 followers of People's Temple leader Jim Jones. The story and the questions it raised dominated the news for days and weeks. But on this second anniversary of that event without parallel, only a handful of relatives and friends gathered for a memorial service. And one mourner said, the reality is, 1 week from the day, no one will remember. David Dow reports.
A single headstone marks the mass grave in Oakland of 378 victims of the Jonestown tragedy. Today, local church groups held a memorial service for them. About 30 relatives attended. Most, said a spokesman, prefer to mourn privately.
Help us, Lord, to do all that we can to prevent such a tragedy from happening in our community again.
What Fred Lewis and his family are doing is collecting funds for a youth center, someplace for restless young people to turn besides a cult. Lewis lost 28 relatives in Jonestown. Like most here, 2 years have done little to erase the memory.
Every month I come out and sit and look at the cemetery and look and see where the 4 that was identified, I see where they were buried, and the others, I don't know where they were, but I'm here.
Underlying the grieving is bitterness. The People's Temple building in San Francisco has a new owner, a Korean Presbyterian church. But $7 million in temple assets, including the proceeds of an auction, have still not been distributed to surviving relatives, many who had given everything they had to the People's Temple. Compounding the problem, more than $1 billion in claims against the assets. And to many, there still has not been a satisfactory investigation of the tragedy. The children of Congressman Leo Ryan, who was killed in the ambush that preceded the Jonestown massacre, have filed suit against the government, hoping to produce such an investigation.
Dad was the only congressman ever to be killed in the line of duty, and to see his life go for nothing and to not have a reason for it is not satisfactory to us.
I don't see that anybody has learned a lesson from what happened down there, and that scares me.
Though the cult of Jim Jones is apparently dead, a psychologist who counsels 250 former followers and their relatives says many of them still grapple with the most basic questions. How did they get swept up in Jones' movement? And why did so many die for it? David Dow, CBS News, Oakland, California.
And that's the way it is. Tuesday, November 18th, 1980, the 381st day of captivity for the American hostages in Iran. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Larry Layden was considered one of Reverend Jim Jones' most loyal disciples. So loyal, government prosecutors claim that he was willing to commit murder. Layden is charged with conspiracy to murder Congressman Leo Ryan and the attempted murder of diplomat Richard Dwyer. Both were shot in a hail of bullets after they made an inspection tour of Jonestown in 1978. U.S. Attorney Joe Rusinello told the jury that Layden was one of a band of assassins ordered by Jones to kill Congressman Ryan, his party, and the newsmen covering the tour. 4 people were killed, a number of others wounded. It was only minutes later that Jim Jones orchestrated the nightmare in which 900 of his followers drank poisoned soft drinks in what is now known as the Jonestown Massacre. Fred Lewis lost his wife and 7 children at Jonestown. He's still trying to find out why.
To have Larry Layden convicted, it wouldn't. All I want to do is have the truth to come out. If the truth is there, let it come out.
Defense attorney Marianne Bachers, in her opening statement to the court, said that Layden did wound 2 Jonestown defectors trying to escape on an airplane, but she said he had nothing to do with the murder of Congressman Ryan and the others. Today's session ended with the playing of a recording of Jim Jones telling his followers that Ryan's party was coming to destroy Jonestown, and if that was their intent, they would never leave alive. The defense team said it is confident of getting an acquittal for Larry Layden. One, because the horrors of Jonestown happened 8 years ago, enough time for many of the details to be forgotten by witnesses who will have to testify. They also say the prosecution may have a hard time convincing a jury because much of the evidence is circumstantial. From the Federal Building in San Francisco, I'm Ben Williams, Channel 5 Eyewitness News.
Welcome to West 57. I'm John Perugia. It's been more than 10 years since Jim Jones led his followers to mass suicide in the jungle of Guyana, South America. But this is a story about Jonestown you may not know. Jim Jones was called Father by his flock, and for a time his most trusted lieutenant was a lawyer named Tim Stone. He was a man who did Father's bidding and helped create his utopian vision called Jonestown. This is the story of Tim Stone and the battle for his son, John Victor. A battle which became a catalyst for tragedy. Today, the jungle is reclaiming Jonestown. All that is left are a few fragments in the bush and the echo of Jim Jones's voice.
If by any chance you would make a mistake to try to come in and take any one of us, we will not let you. You will die. You will have to take anybody over all of our dead bodies.
so desolate. I felt that at that very moment, John Victor's life might be taken away, and there's nothing I could do.
I never heard a man speak like this man before.
When you were here, were you a true believer?
Oh, yes. This was utopia. I believe that.
I never heard a man speak like this man before. Welcome to Guyana.
After 10 years, Tim Stone returned with us to Guyana to see the remnants of Jim Jones' private empire, an empire he helped build, securing housing, a headquarters, and cooperation from the government. He had first come here as Jim Jones' most powerful aide, and then later as his fiercest enemy. The battle he lost to save his son is one story of Jonestown.
He was the most blessed thing that ever happened to me, John Victor was. And he gave me so much joy that if I could have him for a day, I'd go through all the misery that the People's Temple has cost me, without question.
When did you decide that your son, John Victor, would be brought up by the church?
Or before he was born, I said, this is the best. People's Temple is the finest environment that the world has ever known for raising children and for producing good human beings.
San Francisco in the early 1970s was enraptured with Jim Jones. His fiery mix of social activism and racial harmony, coupled with his mystical healing powers, captivated thousands.
Now, is the pain gone?
His followers included an ambitious lawyer, Tim Stone, his young wife, Grace, and their child.
People from all walks of life were just fascinated by Jim Jones. I mean, I remember going to a testimonial dinner. Who was there at the dinner? You got Angela Davis, the communist, and then you have Walter Heady, the chairman of the John Birch Society. And then you had the lieutenant governor of the state of California, you had the mayor, you had the DA, you had the chief of police, you had the supervisors, you had businessmen. They were all there at this meeting, and I thought, Jim, you got your act together.
Your wife, Grace, your wife at the time, was she as convinced as you about Jim Jones, about the temple?
She never believed in Jim Jones for a minute. She just loved me. She followed me into what for her was a hellhole because she loved Tim Stone.
10 years ago, Grace Stone saw what her husband didn't see, the dark side of Jim Jones.
The death threats. Nobody leaves this church without dying. He had this one woman very severely beaten, and the beatings never did sit well with me. I can remember running to the farthest point in the church in San Francisco and just cringing because, as these people were beaten, we were instructed to laugh and to smile. And if we didn't, we would be the next one to be beaten.
What was she saying to you about Jim Jones?
Nothing, because I did not allow my wife to communicate with me. I didn't want to make her weak. That's how much of a true believer was. And when I proposed to her, I said, Grace, I said, the church comes first.
I stayed just to be, because I had this son. And it dawned on me that I really didn't have him. I didn't have him physically, I didn't have him mentally. And I truly thought that I would be killed. And I got to the point, I would rather be dead than to live like this. I just could not handle it anymore.
Grace Stone's defection stunned Jim Jones. He'd given her a prominent position in the church, hoping to make her a disciple. But now she had rejected him, talking to reporters, sparking the first investigative stories about his People's Temple. When those articles started, your job was to keep everything cool.
Oh, what I did is I wrote nasty letters to the reporter. I helped form the picketing around the San Francisco Examiner. I played hardball, no question about it. I played hardball for Jones, and that's the way I'm in. I'll give you 110%. And in a way, I'm a dangerous person because whatever it is I believe in, I will give you everything that I am.
But the newspaper stories continued. Jones felt he was under siege, and at his temple, his rambling speeches began to foreshadow the end.
I've lost interest in this old world. I would just as soon bring it to a screeching stop in one glorious moment of triumph. So you think about it.
He began immediately to make plans to bring his followers here to Guyana. a sanctuary where he felt they could all be safe. Tim Reiterman, then a reporter for the San Francisco Examiner, was one of the journalists who would not let Jones escape his troubles.
Tim Stone was still in the church at that time, and the Stone child, John Victor Stone, was taken with Tim Stone's permission to Guyana, even after Grace left the church.
I still believe we could make utopia work, and that John and I, and hopefully Grace, we would just have this lovely family together in Jonestown. Well, Grace had seen too much, and she didn't come.
Stone was caught between his love for Grace and his devotion to his son in the People's Temple. He decided to leave John Victor at Jonestown, go to San Francisco, and beg his wife to return. But that only provoked Jim Jones' paranoia. He feared the entire family might desert him. And after Stone left, Jones began to turn John Victor, then 6 years old, against his parents. Turning Jonestown's children against his own enemies was standard practice for Jim Jones, and it delighted him.
I like to kill Grace Stone and Tim Stone. I'll go back and do it right now.
I think that I should take a knife and cut Mr. Tupper all up real good and put poison in him and invite all my relatives over there and have them eat him, and then I'll die.
I had been told by someone that got out, she came back and she said, you know, when John says something positive about you, he's hit on the head. That was very devastating. And I finally made up in my mind that Jim Jones was going to have to kill me to stop me from at least trying to get John back.
He said, Tim, you know what they're saying to John? I have it from a first-hand source. They're telling John, I never loved him. I locked him in a closet, and I abandoned him. Now, as soon as she said that, for the first time in 7 years, I got total clarity that no ideology, no philosophy, no matter how pure it may appear, can justify violating natural law, violating a mother's love for a child and a child's love for his mother like that. And I said, Grace, give me a day. Called her back the next day. I said, Grace, I'm taking him on.
For 6 months, the Stones bombarded Jones with lawsuits on 2 continents, trying to gain custody of their son. But there was a problem. Years before, Tim Stone had signed a letter stating that Jones, not he, had been the father of his child. Both he and Grace have always rejected the document as untrue. During our trip to Guyana, Stone refused to discuss the letter. It had been a weapon Jim Jones used to retain control of John Victor, a weapon Stone had given him.
Total dedication was demanded of each and every member. Even to sign false confessions that conceivably could have been used to take their children away from them later, they did it.
John is my son. Anyone who could look at him, you know that. Anyone looks at my baby pictures and his baby pictures, or look at him now. It's very easy to discern who he is.
We don't know whether that's true or not, but he said again and again that he was trying to keep his son with him in Jonestown, didn't want to give up his son. It was that simple.
He's my son, and before I give him up, I tell you, no matter what you decide to do, I will die.
Jim Jones was obsessed with Tim Stone in the last several months, of course, and also those last few days. It was clear that he thought that Tim Stone, at least said that Tim Stone was behind all of his troubles.
Who's done us the most physical damage? Stone. Who knows more? Timothy Stone.
Tim Stone wanted us to kill him quick. You don't kill a little piece of white ass like him. We're going to kill his white ass. Let him suffer to death.
I got guns. I got dynamite. I got a hell of to fight. I'll fight. I'll fight. I will fight. I will fight. I will fight. I will fight.
Tim Stone's last best hope to get his son out of Jonestown rode with Congressman Leo Ryan, who joined him and other concerned relatives in a final appeal to Jim Jones. The Stones weren't allowed to enter the encampment, but Ryan and a small delegation, including reporter Tim Reiterman, went in.
When I met Jim Jones, his eyes were sort of glazed. He just had this sense of doom about him.
People play games, friend. They lie. What can I do about liars? Are you people going to leave us? I just beg you, please leave us.
Grace and Tim Stone stayed behind, 150 miles away at the Pegasus Hotel in the capital city of Georgetown.
There was a bench there 10 years ago, and I was sitting on that bench, and Grace was over there against the wall, and there was about 4 or 5 other relatives sitting here. And then we were waiting for everybody to come in, and we were expecting them maybe early, like 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So now it's about 7:30 when we're sitting here, and then we're starting to feel something's up.
Ryan left Jonestown with 16 defectors, believing he had reached a shaky truce with Jones. But he was wrong. In a surprise attack, it took Jones' henchmen only a few minutes to murder Leo Ryan and 4 others.
The manager of the hotel and the security people came and said, "You better get up to your rooms. There's been a shooting." Grace and I knew then, if Jim Jones is willing to kill a congressman, he's going to take everybody down. So we knew at that moment Jim Jones was killing everybody in Jonestown, including our son. I mean, and the sense of desolation was so great, you could feel your bones were rock solid. There was no softness in your life. There was no softness in your body. You felt that was it.
Please, for God's sake, let's get on with it. We've had as much of this world as you're going to get. Let's just be done with it. Let's be done with the agony of it.
Jim Jones also made a prophecy when he died. He tape recorded himself, and this when everybody's committing suicide. The last thing he says is, we win when we go down. Tim Stone will have nobody else to hate. He'll have nobody else to hate. Then he'll destroy himself. So here I am sitting talking to you 10 years later, and I say I have a choice in life. The grief has been overwhelming, to be honest with you. I feel a lot of guilt. I feel guilt for helping make the temple strong. I feel guilt for allowing John to be in Jonestown. I feel guilt for not giving Grace a decent marriage. I feel a lot of guilt, but I don't want my guilt to become so paralyzing that I yield to the last prophecy of Jim Jones.
When did you find out about John Victor?
3 weeks after. Then I was told by an eyewitness that they'd seen John's body. She said, "Tim, I have very bad news for you, but I know that you were holding out hope for John. And I'm here to tell you that so-and-so, it might have been Tim Jones, whoever, has seen John's body, and he is dead, and I'm sorry to tell you that." So I went over to see Grace.
John died November 18th, 1978. In a lot of respects, John died many years before that. You know, when they take your children from you and keep them.
What's the legacy of your son's death?
An urgent reminder to the world that every human being is totally responsible to do his own thinking for himself, that there are no messiahs, there are no gurus, there are no other functionaries that can perform this role for you, no matter how selfless they may appear.
All the days of my life, ever since I've been born, I never heard a man speak like this man before.
Grace Stone is now remarried, has 2 children, and is living in Northern California. Tim Stone is now practicing law in San Francisco. And John Victor Stone, whose body was never identified, is presumed buried in a mass grave outside Oakland.
Speak like this man before.
Coming up on West 57th, Wolfgang Puck, a celebrity chef of gastronomic proportions.